Wolfhead Trail and camping. I'd never been camping before, and I was excited to go for the first time. I really thought that it might be fun. It started on a Thursday night. My dad had just decided on our yearly vacation, a trip to the Wolfhead Trail and camping resort in Southern California. The year before, we went to see the Grand Canyon, and the year before that, we went to Denver. I always loved getting to pack into the car and spend time with my family. My brother, Greg, and I would play games in the back seat and entertain our little sister, Rose, while our parents talked and joked in the front. Dad got laid off from the factory, and we were struggling to pay bills, but he was working 2 jobs, one at the quick stop and one at the pizza place. He got us gathered into the living room and told everyone that he wouldn't be canceling our vacation. Instead, he opted to go for something more affordable. He told us that we would all be going camping. My mom was excited. She clapped her hands and shook my shoulder, saying, "Ooh, Bill, doesn't that sound fun?" I thought it did. It would be my first time going camping. Greg too. Will we be sleeping in tents? I questioned. If you want to, then sure. You and your brother can sleep in a tent, but your mom and I will be sleeping in your Uncle Mike's camper. My dad replied, "Where there's a bed and a heater." I looked at my little brother and grinned. "You're not going to get scared, are you?" Greg looked worried and squeaked out a small, "No." "And not me too," Rose piped. My dad smiled and shook his head. "Rose, you sleep in the camper with us. You'll still have bedtime. The boys will just be telling scary stories and farting anyway." "You," Rose shouted, plugging her nose. "Okay, folks, we're taking off on Saturday morning. You boys better be packed up and ready to go. Mom just did laundry, so hop to it," Dad said cheerily. I laughed and hugged him. I thanked him for being so cool, then turned to pack, but he stopped me. "Bill, do you want to invite a friend? We have room for one more." "Seriously? I'll ask Luke." "Thank you." I hugged him again. I whipped out my phone and started texting. Friday came and went. I bragged to everyone I could that I wouldn't be at school on Monday. I hardly paid attention in class. I gave little effort in football practice and even shoved some assignments to the bottom of my book bag. I would do them later. Right now, I had to plan for our trip. On Saturday, I woke up earlier than usual and double-checked all my stuff. Clothes were haphazardly shoved into the bag and my toothbrush was loose at the bottom, but it had all checked out. I even had the lighter that I found outside of the quick stop stashed away in a pair of socks. It was perfect. It might be lame for a 15-year-old to be hyped about camping, but our trips were always great. My parents really knew how to have fun, and I trusted that my dad would give us a great weekend full of new memories. The other thing that I was excited about was the possibility of meeting girls. I thought I might be able to make out with one or something. You never know. I thought to myself as I grabbed the Tic Tacs off my dresser and slid them into the bag. "Greg, get up. We gotta eat breakfast, you goon," I said, shaking my little brother awake. "Already?" He shot up, bleary-eyed. "No, tomorrow," I said playfully. I shoved him back down into his bed by the forehead and ran to the light switch, flicking it back off. "I'm going to get Luke," I hollered at him as I turned out of our room. I leapt off the porch and scooped my bike out of the grass. I jumped onto it and pedaled toward Luke's house. He lived 2 streets over and a few blocks down. The cool morning air made me shiver as I pulled up into his driveway. I jogged up to the door and hit the bell. After a minute, Luke showed up at the door with 2 packed bags, a football, and a beach towel. "Are we swimming?" he asked, holding up the towel. It was cold, but I wouldn't put it past my dad. "I don't know. Just bring it anyway. Are you ready?" Luke grinned and said in a sly tone, "Shit, no teachers or homework. Girls playing volleyball and tanning? Staying up late and eating s'mores. This?" he asked, holding up a joint proudly. "Are you ready, Billy?" "Dude," I swiped at his hand. Put that away. You still got that lighter? Yeah, duh. Good, Luke said and tossed me a bag, smacking me in the nuts as I caught it. Damn, dude. What the hell? The car ride was fun, as usual. We played normal road trip games like I Spy, and my dad told us a story about his first time camping with his dad. Mom had us singing oldies and taking pictures for her. It was as perfect a trip as you could have. As we drove, the mountains got taller and the trees got thicker. We were going deep into the country. We were driving down a rocky road when I saw the huge sign arched above the road that read, Wolfhead. Look at that, crew. We're finally here. My dad addressed us. The sign was old and rotten. It was made of wood with chipped black paint. I thought to myself how they should redo the sign, but how? Maybe it was a protected part of the park, like it was the original or something. Honey, where's the front desk at? My mom asked. Not sure. The maps online weren't up to date. We'll drive around and find it though, Dad said. I stared out the window into the forest. There were miles and miles of trees. It hit me just how far out in the middle of nowhere we were. We had lost cell service more than an hour ago, and deeper we drove. See any hot babes out there? Luke asked, nudging me. Just your mom. I replied back with half a mind. Huh, whatever, dork. What are we gonna do first? Go fishing. Yeah, that sounds good. There's a lake somewhere around here. I looked at the maps with Dad. There's trails all over and a big river that flows into the lake. It looked massive. I'm gonna catch a big bass. Greg injected from the row behind us. You're 12, Greg. A big bass is gonna catch you. I laughed. Mom, I'm hungry. Are we eating lunch soon? Soon as we get settled at the campsite. We'll eat some sandwiches, then set up the camper and tent. She crooned from the front. Look at that, Dad shouted. He pointed out the window and moved his head around trying to get a better view. What? We all questioned. It was a bear. Big old grizzly, I think. Y'all be careful and stay out of the woods. I don't even want to know what one of those things would do if it found us while it was hungry. Geez, it would eat Mommy, Rose shouted from next to me. We all laughed and continued to take in the scenery around us. After driving for a few more miles, we came up to a very, very large wooden cabin. It had a sign above the door stating that it was reception and lodging. Everything in Wolfhead looked old and unkempt. We parked and went inside. It was just as dingy as the outside. There was dust on the counter and a fat old orange cat sleeping on top of it. Luke scratched its ears and it perked up, stretching. The light was dim and hummed loudly. Honestly, it was creepy as hell. Hello? My dad hollered out, leaning over the counter. Hello? Jimmy, are we in the right place? My mom asked in a hushed tone. This doesn't look right. It stinks, she said, looking around at the seemingly abandoned cabin. Smells like they might have a propane leak. You saw the signs, Paula? This is Wolfhead. I just need to get someone's attention back there. Hey there. Anybody? It did stink. A few moments passed. I was looking at some taxidermy on the wall when Dad sighed and said, Well, this is a bit ridiculous, isn't it? I'll be right back. He clapped his hands and went behind the counter. He was gone for about a minute before he came back. Well, I asked. Good news, guys. No one's here. I guess we have the place to ourselves for the weekend. He laughed. Jimmy, we can't dash. My mom started before Dad cut her off. It's fine. Really? Look at this place. It probably shut down and they forgot to update the page online. What else are we going to do? Drive home and call it a vacation? Come on. As soon as we find someone, we'll figure out how to get the paperwork in. Trust me, he said with a reassuring smile. Okay, fine, my mom said, slightly annoyed. Let's find somewhere to settle in then. Luke pinched the back of my arm and mouthed the words, What the fuck? His brow was furrowed and he looked disappointed. I silently told him to relax and ushered him back to the van. What kind of sandwiches are there, Mom? We drove around on the gravel roads for a bit as my dad tried to pick us the best spot. The road was small and our camper was taking out tree limbs. It was loud and grating. I was starting to think that this vacation was about to majorly suck, but then we broke out from the trees into a clearing and I saw the lake. It was a giant lake, clear water, totally surrounded by trees. Here it is. This is definitely it, Dad said. He eased off of the road and pulled the van and camper up under a tall oak tree, about 100 feet from the water's edge. We all jumped out of the van, and I did a dash to the back to grab the cooler. Mom distributed sandwiches while Dad unpacked everything else and Rose laid down for a nap. Luke, Greg, and I took our food down to the water and sat on the edge. I picked up a nearby rock and tossed it in. Sorry, Luke. I thought there would be more people around here. This is kind of disappointing. Nah, it's cool, he said, taking a bite of his sandwich. I've had a lot of fun so far. We sat and ate, talking about school and our upcoming fall break. Time passed without much notice. We paid no attention to our phones, just sat and enjoyed the relaxation. We stayed by the water, horsing around and chatting, until Dad hollered at us boys to gather some wood for a fire. Boys, grab some smaller timbers like this. He held up a branch to show us, but be sure to stay close by. If you can't see the camper, you're too far. Grab a good amount, an armful for each of you, and stay together. Understood? Yes, sir. We all said in unison and broke into a run for the trees. Slow down, Greg shouted. Speed up. I shot back. We approached the tree lean and slowed to a jog. Walking around, we gathered branches, big and small. The air was chilly and the leaves had begun to fall. They crunched under our feet as we moved over and through the foliage. It was rough and jagged due to the season. I pushed through a particularly thick patch of thorns and scraped my arms pretty badly. Blood flowed down my arm to my fingertips and dropped onto the forest floor. Son of a, I started, stopping before accidentally cursing in front of my younger brother. I turned back away from the brush, holding my injured arm, and froze. Greg and Luke weren't behind me. Greg, Luke, where are you? I looked back toward the camper. It was in view. I scanned the trees for Greg or Luke, but didn't see them. They weren't by the camper either. At least, I couldn't see them there. I started jogging toward the camper when I heard Luke shouting from the trees behind me. I stopped and listened. Greg, hey man, come on out. Greg, hey, where are you? Greg, his shout echoed. I could hear the fear in his voice. I took off in a sprint towards the source. I found him quickly. Luke was covered in mud, eyes wild. He was shouting for Greg, whipping his head around frantically. I ran up to him. I was wheezing and trying to catch my breath. What happened? I asked. I don't know. He yelled at me. Where's Greg? I don't know. He yelled at me again. What the hell? We gotta find him. Did you check by the camper? I asked. I know. I haven't been there yet. He just disappeared. He was there, and then he wasn't. I turned my back for a half a minute. It's okay. We'll find him. Go check the camper and tell Dad. Go, quick. Luke hesitated but then nodded. Yeah, okay. I'm going. He then ran off toward the campsite, leaving me in the woods. I stood there, shaking. My brother was missing. My little brother. It was my fault. Luke wasn't responsible for watching him. I couldn't believe it. What in the world happened? I started jogging and calling out for Greg. My heart was in my throat, I was sweating, and I started to feel sick. I knew I would never forgive myself if we didn't find him. I looked back to the camper and saw Luke pointing in my direction, frantically talking to my dad. Greg, I shouted, starting to cry now. Please. Dad, Luke, and I searched for Greg for 5 hours. It was impossible to make a phone call. We lost cell service before we even got into the mountains. We had to find Greg ourselves. Once it got dark, Luke and I stayed back at the camper with Mom. She made my dad some sandwiches. He packed them in his survival bag, and then he went back out to look for Greg alone. We sat in the camper, silently. Mom looked drained. She'd been crying but trying to stay positive for us. I'd been crying too. Luke had apologized a million times. Mom told him that it's okay, that it wasn't his fault. Thankfully, Rose didn't understand what was even going on. "Mom, I'm scared. What if we don't find him?" I asked, not really thinking. My mom looked at me and tried to smile, but she quickly fell into tears. "We'll find him, honey. We will," she said through her sobs. "I'm sorry," I squeaked. Mom just cried. We sat and ate dinner. There was a sharp sense of dread while we did. The longer we sat, the more stressful the situation was. It seemed like the walls were closing in. I had so much regret. We finished eating and mulled in our despair. I don't know for how long, but it felt like years. "Mrs. Reading, I'm going to stand outside and listen for Mr. Reading," Luke said, standing up suddenly. "I'll go with you," I said. Mom looked at us, but I reassured her. "Just outside the door, Mom. It's okay. Okay. Stay close." "I mean it, Bill," she said sternly. "We will," I said, leaning down and pecking her on the head. "I love you. We'll be back inside in a minute." Luke and I stood outside in the moonlight. I stared up into the sky and thought about my brother. The steady howl of a wolf echoed through the night, and I imagined Greg sleeping in a wolf's den, safe and warm. Luke was silent, staring out across the lake. I felt bad that I brought him along. He didn't want or expect a stressful trip. He was my best friend. I didn't blame him, and I was glad to have the company, but he didn't need this. After several minutes, Luke slowly walked down to the shore and sat down in the dew-covered grass. I sat next to him. We listened to the wind whisper over the trees as it rippled small waves through the lake. "You want to smoke this thing?" Luke asked me without his regular bravado. He was fidgeting with the secret joint that he brought. I looked to the camper and back to the lake. "Yeah, but we gotta be fast. Let's go downwind of Mom and Rose." I fetched my lighter, and we walked a couple hundred yards down before I sparked the joint. I took deep inhales of the smoke, trying to let the plant relax my nerves. "You know, your dad saw a bear when we got here," Luke said slowly, watching me. "Yeah, so," I said, handing him the joint. "Well, I hope Greg is all right." "I hope so too, but I really don't know. He's smart for being 12. I kept teasing him though. "You don't think he would run away, do you?" "Maybe I hurt his feelings," I said. I lingered on the thought. "Bill, I didn't tell you this earlier because I thought you would say that I'm crazy, but I think there's something in those woods," Luke said cautiously, handing me the joint. "What do you mean?" "The bear." "No, I mean, like, I've had a bad feeling ever since we passed that sign over the road. I do think Greg ran away, but I don't think it was from us." Just then, I heard a sound that ripped my soul out of my body and jammed it back in. A scream. I was on my feet instantly, head craned to listen. Another scream. "Mom." Without a word, Luke and I were making a full-on sprint towards the camper. I could see it while running, but nothing looked out of place until I came around to the door. It was gone. The aluminum door lay on the ground, thrashed. There were heavy gouges in the side of the camper trailer. "Mom. Rose." I shouted. I was stuck outside. My feet wouldn't move, but my legs were shaking violently. I willed myself to go in, but I couldn't. I was terrified. A bear made its way into our campsite and into the camper. My legs felt like jelly and my back was covered in sweat. I closed my eyes and prayed. Then I heard the whimpering. Luke and I stood in the camper. Blood sat pooled by the door, dripping down the steps. It was sticky on my shoes. A blanket sat under the dining table, shaking and whimpering. I bent down and softly spoke. "Rose." "It's Billy." I reached out for her, and she leapt into my arms, crying hysterically. "What happened, Ro? Where's Mommy?" She hugged me and buried her nails into my skin by accident. I winced, but hugged her back. What the fuck happened? My mind was racing. I felt sick again. All I could do was hug my baby sister and tell her that everything was all right. Was it a bear? Luke asked evenly. He looked tense, but his voice was calm. I felt Rose shake her head in my chest. No, I said aloud for her. Luke was speaking frantically. Bill, we need to leave. We can unhook the camper and I can drive us back to that town we got gas in. We'll be there by morning. If we stay here, we're not leaving my family. I cut him off. Are you serious? My dad and Greg are out there. Mom is gone. What do you mean? Leave. We're gonna die out here, man. They're dead. Look, I know you love them. I do too, but this is bad. Luke was shouting now. Look at that blood. Bill, your mom is fucking dead. Rose was still hugging me, crying. I could barely think. My brain was pounding with white noise as I sat on the floor, hugging her back. I could feel how wild the expression on my face was. I was losing it. I closed my eyes and tried to level my breathing. My family's faces flashed through my head and I started to cry. I cried big, heavy sobs. I held my sister and shushed her, rocking us back and forth on the camper floor. Rose was exhausted. The adrenaline had totally sapped both of us. After rocking and crying for some time, she fell asleep. I was tired too, but my brain was still wired. I stood up and carried her to the van, placing her in her booster seat. I covered her with a blanket and started the van. I looked at the fuel gauge. We would have enough to get back to the gas station and get the police out here. I sat down in the passenger seat and turned on the radio. Luke got in and started to drive, looping us back onto the road. I watched closely. Everywhere that our headlights poured over, so did my eyes. My muscles tensed at any sign of movement. I didn't mean to yell at you, bro, Luke said shakily while he watched the road in front of him. I'm sorry, Billy. I know. It's cool. I wasn't thinking. If we're going to find them, we need to report it. I'm just really scared, man. We're going to be okay. All of us. I looked into the back seat at my little sister. She was sleeping deeply, head tilted to the side, mouth open slightly. She snored little snores, and I thanked God that she was safe. I relaxed a bit in my seat and drifted to sleep. Wake up, Bill. Wake up. Look. Luke was shaking me awake, shoving me into the window. Look. I cleared the fog from my head and looked to where he was pointing, having to squint my eyes. There was a large shape off the left side of the road. It was a large, dark mound just outside of the brightly lit area provided by the headlights. It sat off the road and looked as if it were moving slightly. I squinted and leaned forward. It was definitely moving. I can't tell. Get closer. Go slow, I said softly. Luke eased the van forward inch by inch. The light creeped forward simultaneously, lighting up the road. The light crawled up the mound, revealing deep brown fur. I continued to squint, leaned forward. I could feel the seatbelt pressing into my shoulder. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. I could feel Luke's breathing slow and stop. I held my breath too. It was huge. It was covered in fur. It was brown. I could almost see its muscles moving under its thick fur, but its back was to us. It was hunched over, arms ripping at something. Luke eased to a stop and squinted too. It's a bear, he said. Suddenly, as if it had heard him, the thing stood up and barreled across the road, into the woods, to our right. I jumped in my seat, cursing and closing my eyes involuntarily. It was so fast. 1 second it was there, and the next it was gone. Drive. I choked out, fear clutching my vocal cords. Yeah, Luke responded, pressing on the gas and spinning the tires. We closed the distance between where we had been stopped and where the thing sat on the side of the road. We both looked to see where it had been. I saw it and sank into my seat, face drained of blood. No, Luke croaked, tears welling up in his eyes. No, 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 no. He slammed his palm against the steering wheel and picked up speed, glancing into his side view and quickly back to the road. My throat was tight, but I managed to squeak out one word. Mom. On the side of the road, my mother laid. The image burned itself into my psyche immediately. Her face was contorted in fear, smeared in dirt, and cut several times over. Her innards splayed out and gnarled in the ditch. She was missing an arm. There was so much blood that I could nearly vomit while thinking about it now. My beautiful, bright mother was dead. Torn, broken, lost, gone. I cried. My shoulders heaved with each sob. I covered my face in my hands and cursed God that my mother was dead. I shook as I lost a piece of myself. The trees passed us by, and I sat numb. Luke was in a similar state. We kept driving. I felt weak and pathetic. That thing killed my mom, and probably killed my little brother and father too. I hated Wolfhead. My thoughts drifted into a dark place. I began to blame my dad. He set this trip up. He insisted on staying. He sent us into the woods. He left my mom and Rose alone. He thought he could find Greg alone. It was his fault. Sometimes things happen in such a way that they almost seem magical. Luke drove us down the rocky road as I thought to myself, as I thought of my dad. We came upon the cabin that we had been at just 12 hours before. The lights illuminated it. Gravel crunched under the tires of the van as we went closer. I was looking at it, thinking about my family, when I noticed a light in the window. Something moved inside, casting shadows on the wall. For a brief moment, I made out the figure of a person. The person that lived there, that kept the cat fat alive. They must have been inside. My eyes widened, and I told Luke to pull over. Stop! Stop! Look in there. It's a light. Someone's inside the cabin, Luke. Maybe there's a phone we can use. I said urgently while unbuckling my seatbelt. We gotta go in. Luke stopped the car and breathed a sigh of relief. We killed the lights, but left the van running. The soft hum of the van's heater was all I could hear. I didn't take my eyes off the cabin. I opened the door and got out, motioning for Luke to follow. We softly closed the doors and eased up the front steps and onto the covered porch. I peered through the curtains in the window and saw the fat orange cat laying on the floor, sleeping next to a big bag of cat food. Should we knock? Luke whispered in my ear. I guess so. I replied. I raised my fist and slowly knocked 3 times. The light inside went out immediately. I looked at Luke and he shrugged at me. I looked at the van before turning back to the cabin door. I took a deep breath and grabbed the handle. It's locked. No, I'm not doing this. They're letting us in, Luke said, stepping back. Watch out. Luke kicked the door. Hard. He kicked and kicked. The frame groaned but stayed intact. One solid foot after another wasn't going to get us inside. I slammed my shoulder into it and screamed. Let us in. Please, please, we need help, please. We're just kids. I slammed my hand against the door and sank to my knees. Please. The lock unfastened with a click and the door creaked open. My dad stood in the doorway, clothes tattered, bleeding. He was covered in mud. There were leaves in his hair and his eye was swollen and black. It was oozing and dirty. He looked totally awestruck. His voice came out in a gravelly whisper when he spoke. Bill. Lucas. Oh my word. I didn't think it was you. Get in. I couldn't believe it. My dad was alive. He grabbed us by the shoulders, pulled us inside with ease, and closed the door in one motion. I hugged him tight. He wrapped his arms around us and whispered thanks, kissing my head. I pulled away from him and slammed my fist into his chest. What happened to you? Where's Greg? I demanded. Dad's face turned sullen. He closed his eyes and grabbed a handful of his own hair. He opened them and looked into mine, silent. There was a lot of silence that day, the kind of silence that feels loud. He shook his head and looked to the floor. His mouth was open to speak, but he couldn't. "He's dead," Luke said. "Isn't he?" My father nodded his head. "Yes." He squeezed his eyes shut again. Wrinkles formed on his face. He gasped and let out a sound as if he'd been stabbed. A long, breathy wail trailed into sobs for his youngest son. He grabbed me and hugged me tight again. I hugged him back. "Where's your mother and sister, Bill?" The question sounded like it was killing him. It was asked through sniffles and gasps. "Mom is," I began. I couldn't find words either. "Gone, sir." "I'm so sorry." Luke finished for me. He dropped his head, mournful. He was holding the fat orange cat, stroking its fur. It purred in his arms. "Rose," Dad whispered. "She's fine. She's safe, in the van," I said, motioning toward the door. "Dad's good." I shot wide. He moved me aside and made for the van. His stride was purposeful. He spoke over his shoulder. "That thing is out there. Somewhere, Bill. We need to leave. Now." He swung open the door and stepped onto the porch. He looked out into the trees, signaling for us to stay. After a moment, he nodded and directed us into the van. "What thing?" I asked. "The bear." We got in and closed the doors. Luke placed the fat cat in between him and Rose. It laid down and curled up. Dad turned the lights on and put the van in reverse. We backed up onto the road. He was looking around like a madman, head constantly on a swivel. As the van straightened out, he put it in drive and started forward. A figure stood in the road. A person. The headlights lit him up. I couldn't believe my eyes. I thought it was just us, but there, about 100 feet away, stood a naked man. He was breathing heavily. He looked a little bit older than my dad, maybe 50 years old. He was skinny but had a lot of defined muscle. He took a step toward us and Dad pressed the gas. We shot forward. We were heading directly for him, and he didn't move. "Dad!" I shouted. I thought he'd lost his mind. Rose was awake now, crying and screaming for our mom in her booster seat. Slam. We hit the guy hard. He went up and over the van. Landing on the other side, his body twitched and then shot up. He screamed after us. The scream was inhuman, animalistic. His head shook as he screamed, and he began sprinting toward the van. I stared in horror at what was happening. Dad stopped, threw the van in reverse, and slammed the gas to the floor. "It's not a human. That's the thing that got Greg. It nearly killed me too," he said frantically as we slammed the guy again. Thud. Dad put the car back in drive and pressed the accelerator. We didn't move. The van's engine roared, but we sat completely still. Dust had built up behind us as my dad tried to escape our pursuer. I couldn't see him out there, but I knew that he was what was keeping us still. The van shuddered and the engine shut off. "Shit," Dad shouted. Luke was screaming. I couldn't understand him, but I saw him. He opened the door of the van and bailed out. He ran for the cabin, bounding up the steps and falling through the door. He slammed the door behind him as the rear end of the van slammed into the ground and bounced. We were making noise, trying to draw the thing away from Luke. I rounded the counter and headed deeper into the cabin. It was dark. I had to strain to see that everything was toppled and scattered. I could hear sniffing and gnarling. I tried to keep going, but the fear overtook me again. What was I doing? The man walked after Luke. His arms looked like they were stretching and condensing at the same time. His form changed before our eyes. He grew in height and length. His build became bulky and muscled. Thick brown fur sporadically shot out in patches across his ever-growing frame. His face elongated and teeth hung out of his mouth. His wild, bloodshot eyes went black. He twitched and screamed. He dropped to his knees and buried his head in the ground, tearing at his own flesh. Throwing his head back, he howled. It was a frothy and angry howl. He stood up on all fours and, like the animal he was, dove for the cabin, covering a massive distance in an impossible time. He was fast. The thing barreled through the door, barely scraping through the frame. "Dad, Dad, what do we do? It's gonna kill Luke." I yelled at him. Dad turned the key forward and the van started. He pulled the stick into drive, but I slammed it back up. "Dad, we can't leave Luke," I yelled. "He needs us." I flung open my door and ran, stumbling toward the cabin. "Luke, Luke." My dad ran past me for the cabin. He was still in shape for being middle-aged. He ran in yelling for the thing while I yelled for Luke. "Hey, you big furry fucking bastard. Come on, come on. You want me?" he shouted into the darkness. I made it inside with him, and the stench of the place hit me again. A powerful smell of sulfur filled my nose. We were making noise, trying to draw the thing away from Luke. I rounded the counter and headed deeper into the cabin. It was dark. I had to strain to see that everything was toppled and scattered. I could hear sniffing and gnarling. I tried to keep going, but the fear overtook me again. What was I doing? The man walked after Luke. His arms looked like they were stretching and condensing at the same time. His form changed before our eyes. He grew in height and length. His build became bulky and muscled. Thick brown fur sporadically shot out in patches across his ever-growing frame. His face elongated and teeth hung out of his mouth. His wild, bloodshot eyes went black. He twitched and screamed. He dropped to his knees and buried his head in the ground, tearing at his own flesh. Throwing his head back, he howled. It was a frothy and angry howl. He stood up on all fours and, like the animal he was, dove for the cabin, covering a massive distance in an impossible time. He was fast. The thing barreled through the door, barely scraping through the frame. "Dad, Dad, what do we do? It's gonna kill Luke," I yelled at him. Dad turned the key forward and the van started. He pulled the stick into drive, but I slammed it back up. "Dad, we can't leave Luke," I yelled. "He needs us." I flung open my door and ran, stumbling toward the cabin. "Luke, Luke." My dad ran past me for the cabin. He was still in shape for being middle-aged. He ran in yelling for the thing while I yelled for Luke. "Hey, you big furry fucking bastard. Come on, come on. You want me?" he shouted into the darkness. I made it inside with him, and the stench of the place hit me again. A powerful smell of sulfur filled my nose. We were making noise, trying to draw the thing away from Luke. I rounded the counter and headed deeper into the cabin. It was dark. I had to strain to see that everything was toppled and scattered. I could hear sniffing and gnarling. I tried to keep going, but the fear overtook me again. What was I doing? I stood there like an idiot, listening to it. I took a step back. I wasn't a hero. I didn't want to die. I took a step back. I needed to run away from this. I was just a kid. I took a step back. I was going to let my friend die. I took a step back and ran into my father. I turned and looked at him. He looked down into my eyes and pulled me back, stepping in front of me. He put a hand on my shoulder, then turned back for the darkness. I stood there stone still. "Luke," he shouted, proceeding into the shadows. He took the staircase up to the second floor and disappeared from my view. I listened, closing my eyes. I was unable to retreat or advance. Something brushed my leg, something soft and warm. I looked down to see the fat orange cat brushing against my leg, arching his back. It looked up at me, then ran into the shadows. It stopped and stared back. I took several small steps. So did it. I stopped. So did it. "You want me to follow you?" I whispered. The cat trotted down the hallway and stopped in front of a closed door. I followed and pushed it open. It was a bedroom. It stank in there too, but it hadn't been disturbed. The cat walked over to the bed and peered under. A pair of hands darted out and grabbed it, pulling it under. I yelped and backpedaled. "Bill, is that you?" A harsh whisper came. Luke's voice. "Yes." "Holy shit. Dude," I whispered back. "Get out from under there. Let's go." Luke pulled himself from under the bed, holding the fat cat. It purred in his arms and closed its green eyes. I put my finger to my lips and ushered him out of the room. We tiptoed down the hallway, back toward the front. On the front porch, I stopped. "The van is fine," I whispered to Luke. "Rose is locked in there. You can open it from the outside. Go." "No way." "Why? What are you doing?" "I have to make sure my dad gets out of here." I said back, "I'll be right behind you." Luke sniffed and stared at me for a moment. Then his expression changed from doubt to amusement. "What?" I asked. "You're just an idiot." "I love you, man. Good luck. You got 5 minutes before I leave you here with that thing. I can't take this shit anymore." Luke jogged back to the van with his new cat in tow. I nodded slowly and turned back to the cabin. The staircase was dark, but a bit of moonlight shone into the top floor through a window. Slowly, cautiously, I took the steps 2 at a time. As I ascended, the stench grew stronger. It smelled like rotten eggs. I covered my nose and winced. I had to look for my dad. "Dad," I whispered to the darkness. "Where did you go?" "Luke's okay. He's safe." I made it to the landing and listened. The thing was definitely up here. The snarls and sniffs were louder now. The thing sounded frantic. Hungry. Wood creaked loudly, and I could only imagine what it was doing. I moved away from the sound, down the upstairs hallway. The door was open at the end of the hallway. I crept in and looked around. No sign of Dad. I looked out the window and saw Luke sitting in the van, watching the cabin through the driver's window. I ducked back out of the curtain and proceeded creeping through the rooms. The next 2 were empty and ordinary, but the third, the thing had been in there. Everything was toppled and crushed. Bedding shredded, dresser smashed, claw marks everywhere. The thing had done a number on this place. I held my breath and checked the next room. I pushed the door open and slowly stepped through the threshold. It hadn't been here. My heart sank as I realized that there were only 3 rooms left to check. I was losing hope. "Dad, please. Are you okay? Where are you?" I called out in a loud whisper. Nothing. I approached the next room even slower. I opened the door and poked my head in. I sighed, not seeing anything. It was empty. Could Dad have made it out of the cabin? Was he even alive? I went to close the door when I heard him call out to me. "Billy, what are you doing?" "Dad, come on. We gotta go. That thing is in there." I closed the door behind it. I don't think it's smart enough to open a door. He slowly stood from crouching in the closet and stepped toward me. He shot me a thumbs up and smiled a goofy smile. I backed out of the room as he followed. The floor creaked, the snarling stopped. I was keenly aware that Luke was outside, ready to leave us if he had to. I was glad that Rose was safe, but I was worried that we were moving too slowly. I took another step. The floor creaked. Bang. The thing threw itself against the door. Bang. Again. "Run," Dad shouted, shoving me toward the stairs. He shoved me harder than he meant to, and I fell down face first. I tumbled down the stairs, rolling head over end. I slammed onto the floor below and looked up the stairs. Dad was rounding the stairs, about to climb down. I pushed myself up and limped for the exit. I glanced back and saw the beast crash into the upstairs hallway. I shrieked and limped faster. It crashed onto the wooden floor, scrambling to catch traction. I ducked out of the door and into the front room. I rolled over the counter and looked back. Dad was down the stairs now. He faltered and looked behind him. The thing slammed into and through the banister. It dropped down directly on top of my dad. "No. Fuck you, you can't." "No, Dad." I screamed. My throat burned. Tears blurred my vision. A warmth splattered across my face. It was wet, and it was in my mouth. Blood. Dad's blood. The thing was tearing him apart. It snarled and sunk its face into his torso. The thing was so big. There was nothing he could do to fight back. I couldn't do anything either. I screamed again. My heart shattered. Dad fought to lift his head and look at me. It was dark. The tears made it hard to see. I couldn't see him. I vomited onto the floor and took a step back. I hadn't lost my hearing, but I think my brain blocked out the sounds. I wanted to look away but couldn't. Dad! Another splatter of blood hit my face, forcing me to blink. A million thoughts of my dad flashed through my head. He was such a great man. He was such a great father. I loved him so much. This was the third member of my family to lose their life today. My stomach curled into a knot and threatened to tear itself apart. I'm sorry, Dad. I love you, I said. I knew he wouldn't hear me, but I still hoped that he did. I'll take care of Rosie. I promise. I won't ever let anything hurt her. I'm sorry. I stumbled back out. I didn't run. I didn't jog. I dragged myself out. I didn't want to leave him, but I had to. It was too late for my dad. I was powerless and pathetic. I stepped out the front door and into the cold night air. It blew over my skin and made my hair stand up. I was too slow. The van was gone. He couldn't be far, but Luke had already left. I wasn't surprised and I wasn't angry at all. He needed to get Rose to safety, and it was best to assume we were dead. He did what he should have. I dropped my head and sat down on the porch. I realized that I was really tired. My muscles hurt, my brain hurt, and my heart hurt. I took a deep breath. The air tasted good. The air. I reached into my pocket and pulled it out. I smiled and ran a finger over the plastic casing up to the metal striker. Flick. The fire burned so quickly, so brightly, and so intensely that the windows had all blown inward. The ground shook and the second story crumbled. I could barely stand the heat. The howls that came out of the Wolfhead Trail and camping resort's reception and lodging cabin that night were beyond haunting. This place was hell. It was evil. I watched the cabin burn. Everything was bathed in a hazy orange. I had been hoping that the flames would light up the forest and destroy this whole place. I wasn't so lucky. The fire continued to burn even after the emergency services arrived, but the howls had ceased hours before. The thing was dead. I'd never been camping before, and I was excited to never do it again.